Well, hello there, and welcome to this next lecture in this assessment cluster series that you are now watching as part of your TAE 40122 Certificate 4 in Training Assessment with RAM Training Services. Hopefully, you've had a chance to watch lecture number 1 in the assessment cluster series, and this lecture is going to build upon that and talk a little bit more about how to build assessments based on a national unit of competency. And just a reminder, folks, the world of assessing, it's going to really have a lot of terminology that may be unfamiliar for you, maybe a little bit foreign. So just be prepared for some new concepts and new ideas coming your way. And maybe even be prepared to watch these assessment cluster webinars a few times as you get more and more familiar with the terminology. It will get clearer and clearer for you. And it's just a brand new world. So just be comfortable with the fact that there will be new terminology, and that's okay. And the purpose of these webinars is to really break it down for you, simplify it so that you have a working knowledge of it, and you're able to think clearly and go off and be an amazing assessor that really supports their candidates. Now, as part of being an assessor in the vocational education training space or vet sector, it is kind of important that you understand how assessments are actually built and where they come from, and the kind of logic behind all of that. As part of your course, though, you won't actually be required to design and develop assessments. However, it is important to have a good basic understanding of where they come from and how they're built, so that in the course, when you come across an assessment to use with someone else, or even looking at validating assessments, you're kind of familiar with the process in general, and looking at a unit and looking at an assessment and how they all come together. All right. So as always, grab a pen, get ready to write, and get ready to take lots of notes as we go through this video that we're about to go through, how to build assessments based on a unit of competency. All right, so let's jump into it. So what's going to be covered in this webinar? Well, the first thing is we're going to review methods of assessment. All right, we covered that in the first lecture, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper on that. Next, we're going to have a look at where to find units of competency. All right. Then we're going to look at the steps to read a unit of competency, and we'll look at an example for doing that. Then we're going to look at the steps to build assessments and how a assessment designer would go about doing that. Then we're going to look at what is mapping. All right, you're going to hear this concept or terminology of mapping quite a bit in the vet sector, and so we do want to just show you an example of what that would look like and how that can be put together. Then we're going to look at how to build a good observation checklist, because at the end of the day, you are probably going to come across some good ones and some not so great ones, but we just wanted to show you an example of what a good one can really look like there. How to write level appropriate questions according to the Australian Qualifications Framework. Very, very, very important skill that we all need to develop, and we all need to stay on top of, so that when we write our questions, they're not too hard, they're not too easy, and they meet the AQF requirements there. All right. So let's jump into it. So methods of assessment in the vet sector. And this is something we touched on in the first lecture there. But the first thing that we need to remember is that depending on the industry and depending on the level, and depending on the unit itself, it's going to determine what way you actually choose to assess a candidate. All right. Now, one of the challenges is in the vet sector, everything is so flexible. All right. So there is not just one way to actually assess a candidate. There are multiple different ways that you can actually gather evidence of skills, gather evidence of knowledge, and gather evidence of overall performance there. So on this list here, we've got a number of different ways listed that you can choose based on what it says in the unit of competency and based on the context to choose to actually build your assessments or to use the assessments that you've been given, right? So number one here is you've got observation in the workplace. Fantastic, right? So maybe you go and watch someone do something in the workplace. Maybe you watch them serving customers in a coffee shop. Maybe you watch them using a piece of equipment on a mine site. Maybe you watch them using a computer system, right? Whatever it may be, you watch them do it. A simulated task, the difference would be this would be used in the case that you can't actually typically see what you need to see on a daily basis. So maybe it would be in the case that it's maybe a dangerous thing, or there's safety considerations, or maybe it just doesn't happen on the day that you actually go to watch someone do that thing in the workplace, right? So maybe in the case of serving someone at the coffee shop, maybe you need to actually watch them handle an angry or an upset customer. So maybe it's a better idea to actually simulate that, as opposed to going to a coffee shop and waiting for an angry or upset customer to come to the coffee shop there, right? Hopefully that's making sense there. All right, now written assessments, absolutely, we would use those for the theory side of things, or any kind of knowledge information that we would want to or need to test with our candidate. Next one is a verbal interview. Now, verbal interviews are used, just like in job interviews, we will use them to find out what does someone know? And we can also use them as part of a post-practical task. So maybe we get them to do a task, and then afterwards we ask them some questions, such as, why did you possibly do it that way? How did you follow the process? What were you thinking as you did X, Y, Z? Or how did you apply XYZ technique when you were actually doing that task? All right. So you can actually do verbal interviews post task to actually understand what someone was thinking as they were completing a task. All right. Then we got verbal interviews, right? So if someone can't write or has challenges with reading and writing, then you can absolutely switch to a verbal interview in some scenarios there. All right, next one is a portfolio of work. So maybe you're getting someone to build up evidence of maybe artistic or design work that someone has done, or maybe marketing work that they've done, or maybe it's a unit regarding finance and budgets. So as part of that, as part of the portfolio, they need to submit to you a copy of a budget that they've done, a copy of a review of the budget, a copy of meeting minutes that are related to the budget, right? So all of those different things that they've actually created would form part of a portfolio of work, or a project, so to speak, right? So next one we've got there is role plays, and role plays again would be very similar to simulated tasks, but would typically be used when somebody, maybe two or three people or two, need to simulate a conversation, and the assessor can watch how the candidate would actually react or respond in that situation based on the context that's been given to them. Okay. And again, it's one of those situations where maybe it can't be observed specifically in the workplace when you go to do the observation, right? Maybe it is something that requires to be seeing soft skills in action. Okay. Next one, we got third-party reports. Now, third-party reports are basically a testament or a list of statements, or a list of qualities, characteristics, or tasks that somebody else, maybe a workplace supervisor, would sign off to say, yes, this staff member can and does do these things listed on this report right here, and then signs at the bottom to verify that, yes, this person in the past or currently has done those things. And we typically use a third-party report for when it's over a period of time, maybe 1 week or 1 month or a couple of months. And that is in the case where the assessor themselves cannot actually go to the workplace for an extended period of time and see all of the critical things in action that may need to be assessed, right? Now, we do not ever rely just on third-party reports. However, they are a form of assessment that is used to verify and substantiate other forms of assessment. All right. Next, we've got multiple choice questions, and great strategy, and typically used in certificate 1, 2, and 3 more so than the higher levels of assessment. All right. Next, we've got RPL style of assessment, and we'll be covering that at a later lecture there and going into a little bit more detail. But in short, basically, it means that RPL is recognition of prior learning, and it is assessment based on evidence only. Based on evidence only, and there is no actual training. It is only assessment. All right. Now, final point there, the style of assessment will depend on the unit of competency that you are assessing and what will be most rational, logical for that task. All right. So let's have a look at a few more examples, or let's look at some examples of deciding the best way to actually assess some people here. So how would you assess, or how would we assess each of the following? All right. So the first one that we've got there is fighting a fire. All right. Well, probably that one, you're probably thinking a simulated task would probably be best for that one. All right. Simulated task. Okay. Now, next one we've got is the knowledge about policies and procedures. Well, probably for that one, we might go a written test. That could be really good. Now, if you had to, you could go verbal interview, but probably a written test is going to be the best option there. And you would only do a verbal interview if somebody couldn't read or write, and they needed support around that. Making a cup of coffee. Well, probably. Let's just go back and look at our options here. Role play, probably not. Third party report, possibly, but probably the best one's going to be observation in the workplace. All right. Next one, we've got making a presentation. All right. Making a presentation, probably that one, observation in the workplace. You can absolutely observe someone delivering a presentation. Next one, we got making a cocktail. All right. Making a cocktail, well, probably simulated task or observation in the workplace. All right. Then we got removing someone from a venue or de-escalation. All right. So that would be in the case of maybe a security guard. And probably a great one for that would be a role play. A role play would be fantastic for that, where you actually tell someone, please play the role of maybe an angry or upset patron. And then the other person is going to play the role of a security guard and watch how they navigate that situation there. Then we've got researching into XYZ topic, right? Now, that one we could certainly do a written assessment. Maybe it's an essay question, or maybe it's a portfolio of work. All right. So hopefully you're starting to get a sense of the different ways that we can assess people. And based on the scenario and the concept and the unit and what it stipulates, how we could actually put our assessment together and our choice there. All right. So now let's have a look at what we're going to do to actually find the unit of competency there. All right. So in order to find the unit of competency, we need to go to the website training.gov.au, the website training.gov.au. And if we go to this site, we can actually find every single unit of competency that we need, every single qualification, and every single training package that we're going to be possibly using in our industry. Now, the fact is, though, that often assessments are already written for us, which is great. And also sometimes our assessments are actually assessing more than one unit at a time as well. So that's really important to be aware of. And just another comment, just to reiterate something that we mentioned earlier, you will typically not be involved in designing or developing assessments, but it is important to know where they come from. Where do they come from? Training.gov.au. All right, so www.training.gov.au. And we've had a look at that website in other lecture series as well. But let's jump into what are the steps that you would actually go through in order to build an assessment, or where to find the information in the unit of competency for assessing. So let's check it out. So the first thing you want to do, steps to follow to check out what needs to be assessed. First thing you want to read is the assessment conditions, Those are going to tell us what equipment is going to be required. They're going to tell us what qualifications the assessor must have. They're going to tell us maybe if the assessment needs to be done inside, outside, and any other conditions or maybe policies, procedures need to be followed, or equipment that needs to be provided to the candidate there as they undertake their assessments. So you want to check out the assessment conditions. All right. So next, number 2 is you want to read the performance evidence. Now, performance evidence tells us essentially what we need to gather, or what physical thing do we need to watch someone do in order to know that this person is absolutely competent. All right, so maybe in the performance evidence, let's have a chat about the first aid unit of competency. So in the performance evidence for the first aid unit, it will often say, at the moment of this recording, that somebody needs to do CPR. I think it may be 2 occasions, and they need to do it on an infant, and they need to do it on an adult, and they need to do a certain number of compressions and a certain number of breaths. And it really lays out how the CPR needs to be done and what you need to see someone do. And then, it lays out some more case studies or case scenarios. So you need to see someone deal with a bloody nose. You need to see someone treat a wound or a broken leg or a broken arm. You need to see all these different things. So the performance evidence tells us what we typically need to see someone do. See someone do, or gather evidence of someone doing. All right. So again, let's check out a different unit. We could maybe go to a unit such as making a cup of coffee or serving an espresso coffee. So in that unit, highly likely in the performance evidence, we need to watch someone make a cup of coffee, and multiple cups of coffee and different types of cups of coffee. Now, number 3 here, it says read the knowledge evidence. And this is where we find all the knowledge that we need to assess someone on. So you'll often find that it'll say things like policies on procedures, policy and procedures on doing X, Y, Z. Or, if we go to the first aid example, we could talk about the Australian Resuscitation Council policies and procedures on conducting or deploying CPR there. All right. So it's going to have a list of all the different things that we need to check the knowledge of. All right. So let's recap. We read the assessment conditions, then we read the performance evidence and see what we need to watch someone do or gather evidence of them doing. And then number 3 is read the knowledge evidence. All right. Now, that's not all, folks. Absolutely. There is one other thing that we need to think about. We need to make sure that they can do everything that is listed in the performance criteria as well. All right. So it's really important that we don't just ignore the performance criteria. We make sure that those are incorporated as part of our assessments as well. So if you haven't already and you feel like you need to, you may want to take a moment to go to training.gov.au, check out a couple of units, read the assessment conditions, read the performance evidence, read the knowledge evidence, and remind yourself what that all looks like there for a unit that you may be familiar with, right? But not yet, but in a moment, we're actually going to check out an example, which will be really clear for you and bring it to life, all right? But now let's have a think about, well, based on what we read in a unit of competency, then we need to decide on the method that we're going to use, right? And we've kind of already touched on that, but what you would do is you would look at the unit and you would go, okay, probably for this unit, that would be the best way. That would be the best way. That would be the best way, right? And you make some decisions about the best way to assess the items that are listed in the unit of competency. Now, let's check out an actual unit. Let's check out the unit BSB OPS 405, Organized Business Meetings. Now, the point of recording this lecture, this unit is current, and this unit is typically taught in the Certificate 4 level, and it comes from the Business Services Training Package. All right, and it's all about organizing business meetings. So now what we think about is if we were going to assess somebody undertaking that unit of competency and assessing how well they could organize a business meeting, there's a number of things that we need to think about. Okay, so let's jump into the unit itself. All right, so in the unit, we've got elements and performance criteria. Okay, elements and performance criteria. So in this case, we've got two elements to go to element one, prepare meeting documentation and details. Number two, we got record meeting outcomes. Okay. And that's the performance criteria. And then we want to ask ourselves, as we read through each of these items, what would be the best way to assess each of these things, right? So number one, identify type and purpose of meeting being organized. Well, that may be something that we do via a written test, or maybe even part of a project, right? And we would go through and ask ourselves for each of these items, what would be the best way to actually assess them? Now, we would do that, and maybe we'd even write that out on a piece of paper or, type that up in a Word document. All right. So we want to have a look at then the performance evidence and the knowledge evidence. And as we talked about previously, the performance evidence is what we need to see someone do, or what practical evidence do we need to gather from the evidence that the person can actually do that task. So if we have a look here, it says performance evidence. The candidate must demonstrate the ability to complete the task outlined in the elements, performance criteria, and foundation skills of this unit, including evidence of the ability to organize business meetings, prepare agenda, and take notes on at least two occasions. Two occasions. So we need to gather proof that somebody can organize two business meetings, prepare two agendas, and take notes on two occasions. So we would want to think about that as we craft our ideas in our mind, thinking, okay, how am I going to assess that? And then we check out the knowledge evidence. And as mentioned previously, the knowledge evidence tells us the knowledge that we must assess a candidate on. So if we look here, we've got relevant communication techniques. Okay. We've got common formats for agendas and minutes. You've got organization policies and procedures relating to facilitation of meetings, including meeting quorums, required notice periods, meeting resolution, and storage of minutes. So we would actually create a written test question on each of those things there. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 6 items there, but you're probably going to have more than 6 questions because you're going to have maybe multiple relevant communication techniques that you need to ask about. Maybe there's multiple meeting quorums that you need to ask about. Maybe that you're going to have a couple of questions on required notice periods. Maybe you're going to have a couple of questions about meeting resolutions and storage of minutes. Hopefully that's making sense for you there. So even though there's 6 items, it could actually turn into a short answer question task, which maybe has 15 or 20 short answer questions there. All right. So let's have a think. We've read through this item, the performance evidence and knowledge evidence. We've read through this information here. So we would now need to think, well, how are we going to assess this unit? And what we would do? Well, probably we'd use a written test for the knowledge evidence. Absolutely, makes logical sense there. And then we'd probably have an observation form to watch the candidate set up the meeting and take meeting minutes. And then we probably also have a portfolio, which includes meeting invites that are sent out for the 2 meetings. We'd want a copy of the 2 agendas that they create for the 2 meetings. And we want to see the meeting minutes for the 2 meetings. All right. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. And the portfolio would probably have a heading on it and some instructions and tell the candidate exactly what to do, what to include, and maybe even provide some templates for getting the agenda and the meeting minutes done. But that is a good quality assessment there. So you're going to have some short answer questions for the knowledge, maybe 15, 20 questions there. And you may have an observation checklist there. You watch someone set up the room, watch someone organize the furniture, watch someone, put out the tea and coffee and the chocolates, just joking there. And you may have a portfolio and you tell them exactly what to include. And by doing so, you are going to cover all of the critical items from that unit of competency there. Okay. So now, what we can also do is relate that back to the unit of competency and have a chat about mapping. have a chat about mapping. So mapping is the art of basically showing on a table format what and where each item is actually being assessed. And we'll just bring up an example of mapping and what that looks like in just a moment. Let's do this right now. All right, so we got the mapping example here. Now, we will zoom in a little bit here. So what you'll often find is with mapping, you will have the items or the criteria listed on the left-hand side there. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6. Then to the right of that, you are going to have columns that would indicate the assessment method. So you may have a written test, observation, portfolio, and a third-party report. And what I recommend to people is, well, what we recommend is put an X next to the way that you're going to assess it. So if you're going to assess 1.1 by a written test, you would put an X in that box, okay? And we'll talk about the numbers in just a moment. But the first thing you're going to do is put an X in the box. So 1.1, if you're going to assess it via a written test, drop an X in there. If you're going to assess 1.1 also by a portfolio, then you would drop an X in there as well. All right, so you would go through and read all the items and then put an X wherever you're going to assess it. So then we come down. Now we've also got the foundation skills, and we haven't really touched on those, but in the unit of competency, it's also going to list the foundation skills, the reading, the writing, the oral communication, numeracy, initiative, teamwork, planning, organization, technology, right? And it would make logical sense that foundation skills are probably going to be covered by the observation and the portfolio and the third-party report, though. All right. So what we're going to do is drop an X in there to show that, yep, probably numeracy is going to be covered by the observation checklist. All right. So we're doing a big picture overview. How are we going to assess each of those items? And then we're going to come down here, and we've got that PE, which is organize business meetings, prepare agenda, and take notes on at least 2 occasions. So probably that, if we need to assess that, we would drop a cross in observation because we're going to observe someone do that. And then we're going to drop in a cross for a portfolio, the portfolio. Hopefully that's making sense there. All right. All we're doing is just recording how are we going to assess each of those items. Then what we do is we want to come down to the KEs, right? So the knowledge evidence. And what we can actually do is we can, as we build our short answer questions, we can actually drop in our question numbers. So relevant communication techniques. Maybe you build a question on relevant communication techniques and you actually discover, yeah, question 1, you make question 1, that would cover relevant communication techniques. Then common formats, that actually you've got a question, you got question 2 would cover that. And then organization policies and procedures, maybe question 3 would cover that. And 4, 5, and 6, etc. All right. So basically a mapping document is a way that you can actually record how you are assessing each of the items that you are actually assessing from the unit of competency. Now, on the right-hand side, we've got third-party report. So very similar, all right? Anything that's going to be listed in the third-party report is going to correlate back to the unit of competency. So you got 1.1, well, you may want to cover that off by the third-party report. So you drop an X in there and you make sure that in the third-party report, all of those items are listed out there, all right? So just to recap, what does mapping do? Basically, it's just a place to record how you are going to assess each of those items, right? And one of the other great ideas that you can also use is if you ever are doing mapping, you can actually print off the unit from training.gov.au and you can actually write next to the numbers what is the way that you're going to assess it? All right, that's another great strategy. And then you can create a Word document and put a table in and kind of create some mapping like this. All right, as part of your course, with RAM training services, you will not be required to do too much mapping or really have too much of a handle on mapping. But basically, it's just something to be aware of. And it's something that you may come across in an RTO if you are ever doing validations or reviewing units and making sure that everything is being accurately assessed there. All right, so let's come back to the unit that we were looking at. All right. And just a side note, the more you do mapping, the easier it gets. And just be aware that I will say there are multiple different ways to map. All right. And just like with training, there are many, many different ways that you can train and deliver. And that is exactly the same with assessing. There are many, many, many different ways to map a unit. There is many different ways to assess a unit. And that comes back to the fact that the vet sector is all about flexibility and candidate contextualization and making it appropriate for the unit and making it appropriate for the workplace there. All right. So that is a little bit about what a mapping document looks like. And we've touched on that just there. All right. So now let's have a chat about observation checklists. All right. So observation checklists are very, very, very important, and you need to fill them out very succinctly and properly, and make sure you sign everything and make sure you get the candidate to sign everything as well. But we also need to have a think about, well, when you're actually building one, what does a good quality observation checklist look like? And what would it entail? All right. So some of the mistakes, though, before we get into it, would be having too many multi-barreled items. All right. So an example of that would be watch the candidate, let's see, make a cup of coffee, serve the customer, ask them about their day, and clean up the bench. All right. That would be way too many items in just one criteria there. Hopefully that makes sense, right? It would be way too heavy and logistically impossible. And also, it doesn't look good formatting wise to be able to put that all into one criteria. You would want to have that over like 3 or 4 criteria and one criteria per item there. Next, not being clear on the task, not actually giving clear instructions to the candidate. Next one, not being clear on timeframes, how long the candidate actually has to do the task. Next one, not being clear on benchmark performance, so the candidate actually knows what is actually required of them. All right. So now let's actually have a look at a great quality observation checklist there. And this one is all about making sandwiches. And let's go ahead and bring this one up. Now, we show this one simply because it's very well written up, and it's got some great criteria in it. Now, you may think that there is actually not a unit about preparing and presenting sandwiches. Well, there actually is. And this comes from the hospitality training package. And this is a great observation checklist because it really paints out very clearly what's required for the candidate. All right. So let's check it out. So I got name of candidate, date of assessment, location, name of assessor or observer. And then it's got some instructions for the assessor, which is great. You will be required to observe the candidate making 2 sandwiches. All right. The assessment will be conducted as a direct assessment. You'll be required to read and observe all these steps listed below. The additional observation tasks must take place within the cafe. And the assessment is completed when the workstation is cleaned and to the XYZ Cafe 43 standards there. Now, instructions for the candidate, well, they are told that they need to talk to a customer, write down the order, clarify the order, answer questions, prepare the ordered sandwich. All right. And it'll go through a little bit more details there. So then we come down and we've got the actual sandwiches that the person needs to make. In this case, it's a mozzarella. And then we got the salmon BLT. Great. Okay. So then we come down and we begin the actual observation checklist, right? Now, here, we just want to illustrate and point out a couple of things. So we've got, did the candidate, number 1, provide the customer with the menu and inform customer of any specials available. All right. And to the right of that, we've got a yes, no, NA, and then a place for comments, which is pretty good, And Then, as you notice with item number 2 and 3 and 4, it's actually got added in some very clear benchmarks on exactly what the assessor needs to hear or see the person do. It's a very good observation checklist because it lays it out very nicely. So let's have a look at number 2 here. It says, explain to the customer the different sandwich options available. And then in brackets got benchmark performance. And it says, assessor must hear the candidate explain the options clearly and concisely. Number 3, obtain the customer's order. Assessor must hear the candidate say the following phrase. All right. So maybe there's a particular phrase at that shop that they really want their staff to use when they take the order. Number 4, relay order back to customer asking if the order is correct. Assessor must hear the candidate relay the order clearly, and you could drop in some other words there as well. So what you can actually do is you can put in benchmark performance for every single criteria, as has been done here within this in the red writing, and you can make it specific to that workplace scenario, and you can really add in the policies, the procedures, and make sure that the assessor is hearing and seeing exactly what needs to be heard and said there. All right. So if we come down, number 9 here, cut ingredients and completed sandwiches to ensure uniformity of presentation. So you could maybe drop in assessor must see the candidate, cut the sandwich in XYZ fashion, right? So you can actually add that in there as well. So you won't always hear or see benchmark criteria for every single criteria in every single observation checklist you use. However, it is becoming more and more common practice there. All right. So we are coming down and we've got all of these items that are beautifully laid out so that the assessor knows exactly what to look for whenever they are watching somebody. What have we got here, folks? We've got prepare and present sandwiches. Now, if we come down to the bottom here, let's just have a quick chat about feedback, right? And overall result. So candidate's overall performance met the standard, either satisfactory or not yet satisfactory. So if someone was not yet satisfactory, well, we would get them to do the observation again or task again. And that we may give them multiple opportunities to do that. That's going to be dependent on the RTO. Then signed by the assessor, observer, fairly self-explanatory, the date, and then signed by the candidate, we get them to sign it, and then additional comments regarding the person's performance. Very, very important that we give good quality feedback there. All right. So we just wanted to show that one as a great example of a good quality observation checklist that we came across in the industry there. All right. So now let's come back to our slides for just a moment. So that was a great observation checklist. Now let's have a think about making level appropriate questions. As we talked about the AQF, Australian Qualifications Framework, Australian Qualifications Framework. So that was certificate 1, 2, 3, 4, diploma, advanced diploma, all of those different levels. So we need to make sure our questions are not too hard, not too easy. They are Goldilocks just right for our candidate. So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, typically, all assessments must align to the level we are assessing. And let's check out the different styles. So Cert 1, typically it's going to be true or false, yes or no, or what is type questions. All right. Cert 2, we've got multiple choice or what is type questions there. Cert 3, we generally have like process orientated questions. How do you? Why do you? Why do we? Why is it important to? What are the steps to? What are the 3 steps to? What are the 5 steps to? You know, how would you do X, Y, Z? All right. Cert 4, we've got what would you do if X, Y, Z happened? Why would you do X, Y, Z? How would you handle X problem? So how would you handle the coffee machine breaking down? What would you do? All right. Explain what X is, or explain how you would, or define X. Define the policies and procedures around using X piece of equipment. All right. Then we've got describe that. All right. So Cert 4, generally, you're going to be looking at definitions and working knowledge there. Diploma, you want to analyze, recommend, evaluate, describe, and summarize. And you want to get people to be able to think at a higher level of cognition, right? So it could be something like, analyze the latest trends around XYZ and make a recommendation, or make 3 recommendations on how X could be done better, or evaluate the current process on XYZ, or describe how we could make X even better, or summarize 3 policies that relate to XYZ there. All right. So those are some different ways that we can structure our questions, and we can put it all together there. And you're going to hear many, many more examples as you go through the assessment cluster lecture series there. All right. But highly recommend that you do take a photograph of this slide, and you really start to build up a bank of good quality level appropriate questions for your world that you work in there. All right, so that is level appropriate questions. And now let's jump into a quick quiz to see what you've remembered from this lecture series, right? So number 1 is, what is the first step that we do when building an assessment? All right, basically just going to give you a hint there. What would you read first of all in the assessment or in the unit? All right, what would you read first? What would you read first? Number 2, what section of the unit of competency tells us the physical evidence that we need to gather or see? Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. The first word is performance. Performance, all right? Number 3, what are the 4 principles of assessment? Now, we talked about this in a previous lecture, and you may remember where we talked about very fast red Ferrari there. We may have talked about, there's a V and an F and an R and an F, right? Maybe you can go back to your notes and remember what they were. And next on number 4, why do we do mapping? And number 5 is, what is one important thing that an observation checklist must have? What's an important thing that an observation checklist must have, right? So time to pause and think. So you may want to pause the webinar now. And we will soon reveal the answers. All right, let's check out the answers, folks. We have number 1. What's the first step that we do when building an assessment? Read the assessment conditions. All right. Number 2, what section of the unit of competency tells us the physical evidence? Well, that's the performance evidence section. All right. Number 3, what are the 4 principles of assessment? Very fast red Ferrari, aka valid, flexible, reliable, and fair. Valid, flexible, reliable, and fair. And just to put that in context, so valid, we know it's valid if it matches the unit. So when we're looking to build our assessments in the unit, if it says do CPR for 2 minutes, and in the observation checklist it says 2 minutes, well, that would be valid. All right. And if all the mapping is complete, well, we would say that is valid. Flexible, if it allows for RPL and it allows for different methods of assessment, we would say that's flexible. Reliable, if all assessors use the observation and checklist in the same way, and all assessors use the written test in the same way, we would say that's a reliable assessment. Fair, if the assessment is fair for everyone and doesn't discriminate, we would call that fair. All right. But if the assessment says only people with blonde hair and blue eyes can do the assessment, well, that's probably not going to be fair. Next, number 4, why do we do mapping? Well, we do mapping to show where we are assessing each item from the unit of competency there. Number 5, what is one important thing that an observation checklist must have? And clear benchmarks and clear instructions to all parties is critically important there. All right. So I know that we've covered a lot in this lecture. However, hopefully after watching it maybe 1 or 2 times, the terminology is starting to get clearer and clearer for you. And maybe you might use this as a trigger point to go and look at some different units of competency, read through their performance evidence, knowledge evidence, and the assessment conditions, and get even more familiar with how units are set up and assessments sort of generated from units of competency there. So on that note, folks, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being committed to your journey. And we look forward to the next lecture series, or the next lecture in this series, where we'll dive deeper into the world of assessing and the skills that are required to do that, and how to conduct an exceptional assessment that is both professional and compliant. Thanks for watching, team.